Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are tuning in right now, I'm going to make a pretty safe bet about you.
Yeah, you definitely aren't just here for background noise while you do the dishes.
Exactly. You are a serious learner. You're likely a future bureaucrat in the making, or at the very least, someone who really wants to understand the machinery of this country beyond just the sensationalist headlines.
Right, because today we are getting into the absolute weeds of the Indian economy.
We are. And we aren't just skimming the surface today. We are looking at a topic that is arguably the most critical balancing act for any developing nation.
It really is. It's that friction between getting rich and, well, staying alive. The conflict between the smokestacks of industry and the actual air we breathe.
To kick this off, I want you to imagine something for a second. Visualize a pristine forest. It's been there for centuries, full of biodiversity, holding the soil together.
Okay, I see it.
Now imagine you chop it all down, every single tree. You sell that timber for a massive profit. Then, on that cleared land, you build a massive factory.
A very dirty factory, I imagine.
Oh, completely.
Right.
It belches out black smoke, but it produces high-grade steel. Now, if you look at your ledger, your national accounts, your GDP just went through the roof.
Because you sold the timber, you built the factory, and now you're selling the steel.
Exactly. The economy is booming. But the question is, did your country actually get richer? Or did you just burn the furniture to heat the house?
That is the classic paradox right there. It's
Yeah.
the fundamental tension between immediate economic output, which is what we measure in quarterly reports, and long-term survival.
Which we basically ignore until it's too late.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are exploring today. We are doing a deep dive into Chapter 3 of Sanjeev Verma's Indian Economy, which is titled Sustainable Development and Climate Change.
But we aren't stopping there. To make sure we squeeze every ounce of value out of this for your exam preparation, we are also layering in insights from Vivek Singh's Indian economy.
Which is fantastic for the technical stuff.
Right. We're using Singh specifically to clarify some of the trickier technical concepts. Things like the environmental Kuznets curve and the specifics of green GDP. Verma touches on them, but Singh really dissects them in a way that helps with those tricky prelims questions.
And of course, because this is a full summary for UPSC-focused deep dive, really inspired by the Simplified UPSC by BPP YouTube channel approach, we're going to look at everything through the lens of the exam.
We aren't just learning for intellectual curiosity here.
No, we are maximizing retention for the civil services examination. Every concept we touch, we're going to ask how this shows up on paper.
Absolutely. Now, before we jump into the roadmap, I do have a small request. We put a massive amount of work into decoding these heavy texts for you. If you want to keep this content coming, please subscribe to the channel.
It honestly makes a huge difference.
It really does. And if you are capable and find value here, please support us on Patreon. It's what keeps the lights on and allows us to dig this deep into the source material.
A huge, heartfelt shout out to all our current supporters. You are the ones who help us create this super useful content.
Yes, thank you all. And for everyone listening, please smash that like button and share a valuable comment below. It really helps the algorithm get this knowledge to more learners.
Just one last thing on resources before we start. Don't scramble to take notes yet. We have free notes with practice previous year questions, the PYQs, available on our public Telegram channel.
But for the serious aspirants who want the full arsenal, you can join the private Telegram library.
That's where we keep the premium notes, detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, and crucially, the model mains answers in a really organized way.
You just have to DM the public channel to join that. Okay, housekeeping done. Let's look at the roadmap.
So we are strictly following Sanjeev Verma's structure today to keep things organized. We'll start with section 3.1, the concept of sustainable development.
Like, what does it actually mean beyond the corporate buzzwords?
Exactly. Then 3.2, the conflict. Sustainable development versus climate change. This is where the physics of the atmosphere clashes with the economics of growth.
Then we move to 3.3, which covers the targets, the SDGs.
Right. Then 3.4, the measurement. Green GDP. How do we count the cost of that burned furniture you mentioned earlier?
And finally, 3.5, the money. Climate financing. Who actually pays for this massive transition?
And as promised, we will be weaving in those PYQ linkages throughout to show you exactly how the UPSC asks about these topics.
It's a very full agenda.
Yeah.
Let's get started with Section 1, Defining Sustainable Development. Now, This phrase, sustainable development, is thrown around constantly.
Oh, everywhere.
Corporate boardrooms, political speeches, marketing brochures, it's become a bit of a buzzword. But in a rigorous economic sense, specifically within the context of these texts, what are we actually talking about?
Well, if we strip away the marketing, we have to look at the classic definition.
Yeah.
It's often attributed to the Brundtland Commission report from 1987. And it's actually quite elegant in its simplicity. Sustainable development is defined as meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs.
So at its core, it's an intergenerational contract. It's about, well, not being selfish.
In a way, yes, it's basically saying, don't eat the seed corn. If you eat the seeds today, you're full for a day, but your children starve next year.
Right.
But Sanjeev Verma makes a very important distinction right at the start of the chapter. He notes that this is a global terminology.
Because the environment doesn't care about borders.
Exactly. Think about it. Global warming, ecological imbalances, the hole in the ozone layer, ocean acidification. These aren't problems that stop at a border checkpost.
You can't build a wall to keep out carbon dioxide.
You really can't. One country cannot solve this alone. It absolutely requires collective dialogue.
Right. But here is where it gets really interesting. And frankly, where Verma adds a massive amount of value for an Indian reader. He brings us down to the Indian context immediately.
You got to.
He argues that in a country like India, you cannot divorce the concept of poverty from sustainable development.
This is a crucial insight. And it's one that, frankly, often gets lost in Western discourses on climate change. Verma points out a very disturbing fact.
Which is?
We have had periods of increased growth. We have an expanding size of output. I mean, our GDP is climbing. Yet at the time of his writing, we had millions living below $1 a day. India is home to the largest number of poor people in the world.
So his argument is that poverty itself is a driver of unsustainability.
Precisely. Now, it's not that the poor are pollutants. That's a very dangerous misinterpretation.
Right. We have to be careful there.
Exactly. It's that poverty forces unsustainable practices. If you are starving, you will cut down the last tree to cook your food. You will fish the last fish to feed your child.
Because survival today trumps survival tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
You cannot think about the ozone layer when you don't know where your next meal is coming from.
So the conversation in India has to include the dirty reality.
Yes. When we talk about sustainable development in India, we aren't just talking about Tesla cars and solar roofs.
No.
We are talking about slums. We are talking about a lack of sanitation. We are talking about open defecation. Polluted rivers like the Yamuna or the Ganga, which are polluted not just by factories, but by sewage from settlements that have absolutely no infrastructure.
That's a incredibly powerful framing. So for a developed country, sustainable development might mean lowering their carbon footprint. But for India, it might mean having a working toilet.
Exactly. You have to talk about hygiene and survival.
Yeah.
If you don't address the immediate need for survival, food, shelter, sanitation, you cannot expect a population to care about long-term atmospheric carbon concentrations.
You have to solve the now to save the later.
You do. And this brings us directly to a previous year question.
Yeah.
This is a mains question from 2020, and it fits this discussion perfectly.
Oh, perfect. Let's break it down.
The question was, explain intergenerational and intergenerational issues of equity from the perspective of inclusive growth and sustainable development.
That is a dense prompt.
It is, but it's a beautiful question because it tests exactly what we just discussed. It asks you to split the concept of fairness into two timelines.
Okay, so let's start with the first one, intergenerational equity.
Right. Intergenerational equity is the classic Brundtland definition we started with. It's us versus our grandkids. Will they have a planet to live on? That's the future axis.
And intragenerational.
Intra means within. So intergenerational equity is about fairness within the current generation. It's about the rich versus the poor today.
Ah, so that's the Sanjeev Verma emphasis on poverty.
Exactly. You cannot have true sustainable development if half your population is left behind in squalor, while the other half worries about their carbon footprint. Inclusive growth attempts to solve the intergenerational issue, while sustainable development largely targets the intergenerational one.
That is a brilliantly clear way to break it down. So if you are writing that answer in the mains, you can't just talk about the environment in isolation. You have to connect the environment to social justice.
Correct. If your answer only talks about trees and rivers and completely ignores the poor, you've missed half the prompt. You need to balance the timeline. Equity now, which is poverty alleviation, and equity later, which is climate protection.
Okay, let's move to section 2, the climate change conflict. This is covered in Sanjeev Verma 3.2. Now, we generally know the mechanism, greenhouse gas emissions leading to ecological imbalances.
Right, a basic science.
But I want to bring in Vivek Singh here because he introduces an economic concept that perfectly explains the trajectory of this pollution, the environmental Kuznets curve.
Ah, yes. Environmental Kuznets curve. This is an absolute staple of environmental economics.
Yeah.
I want you to visualize an inverted U shape on a graph.
Okay, an upside-down U. Got it.
Right. The x-axis at the bottom is income per capita, basically how rich you are. And the y-axis going up is environmental degradation, how much you pollute.
Okay, so if I'm starting at the bottom left of this graph, I'm poor and I'm not polluting much.
Right. This is a pre-industrial agrarian society.
Yeah.
You aren't burning much fossil fuel. But as you start to develop, as you move right on the x-axis, you start building factories, driving cars, burning coal.
So pollution shoots up.
Exactly. The curve goes up. This is the industrialization phase.
So the economy is growing, but the environment is really suffering. We are climbing up the left side of that hill.
We are. You are burning coal. You are chopping forests. The logic here is basically we have to get dirty to get rich.
Right.
However, the theory suggests that this doesn't go on forever. Eventually you hit a peak, a turning point at the top of that U.
What actually causes the turn, though? Why wouldn't it just keep going up forever?
A few things happen. First, technology improves.
Yeah.
Your manufacturing gets more efficient. Second, the structure of the economy shifts. You move away from heavy manufacturing, which is dirty, towards services, which are much cleaner.
Like the IT sector instead of steel mills.
Exactly. And third, and honestly most importantly, the population becomes wealthy enough to care.
Ah, going back to the poverty point.
Right. When you have food and shelter securely covered, you start demanding clean air. You vote for stricter environmental regulations. You pay more in taxes for better waste management. So as income continues to rise past that peak, environmental degradation actually begins to decline. The curve goes down.
So the simple analogy is we create a mess to build wealth, and then we use that wealth to clean up the mess.
That's the simplified version, yes. And this is highly relevant because India is often seen as being on that upward slope.
We are still industrializing.
Exactly. We haven't hit the peak of that inverted U yet. And this leads directly into the victim versus villain debate regarding India's stance in global climate negotiations.
Sanjeev Verma is quite firm on this point. He argues strongly that India has low per capita emissions compared to the global average.
That is our primary defense on the world stage, and it's a very strong one. We look at the West and say, look, we have 1.4 billion people. If you look at our total emissions, sure, we are the third largest emitter in the world.
Right, the absolute number is huge.
But if you divide our total emissions by our population, we are actually quite green compared to an American or a European. An average American emits nearly 8 to 10 times more carbon than an average Indian.
That is a staggering difference. But the tension, as Verma points out, is that India needs to grow. We need to burn energy to lift those millions out of poverty, that intergenerational equity we were just talking about.
We can't just stop building power plants.
Exactly. We are in a real bind. We are victims of climate change. I mean, our agriculture is totally dependent on the monsoon. Our coastlines are incredibly vulnerable. But the world is looking at us as potential future villains because of our current coal usage.
It's a tough spot. But we are participating in the global solution. We signed the Paris Agreement at COP21. And this introduced a very important term for the exam, the INDCs.
Intended Nationally Determined Contributions. Now, for the prelims, we really need to memorize the specific Indian targets. There are 3 big ones that Verma lists, right?
Yes, and these are high-yield facts. You must know these numbers cold.
Let's hear them.
First target. India pledged to reduce the emission intensity of its GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030, compared to 2005 levels.
I want to pause on that exact phrasing. Emission intensity of GDP. That is not the same thing as absolute emissions, is it?
No, it is not, and that is a critical distinction that students often get wrong. We are not saying we will emit less total carbon into the atmosphere.
Okay.
We are saying that we will become more efficient. For every single rupee of GDP we generate, we will emit 33% less carbon than we did in 2005. So if our GDP grows significantly, our total emissions can still rise, even if our intensity drops. It's a ratio target, not an absolute cap.
Got it. So that clever phrasing allows us to keep growing our economy without breaking our pledge. What's the second target?
Second target is to achieve 40% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030.
Non-fossil fuel. So that includes solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear.
Correct.
And Looking at the recent data, we are actually doing quite well on this one. We might even hit this early.
We're being very aggressive on renewables,
Yeah.
yes. And then the third target, to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree cover by 2030.
Basically planting a massive amount of trees to suck up carbon.
Exactly. But this is the hardest target, honestly. Land is extremely scarce in India. Finding the actual physical space to plant enough trees to absorb 3 billion tons of CO2 is a massive logistical and political challenge.
Now, how does the UPSC actually ask about this? Let's look at the 2016 prelims.
Right. In 2016, they asked a very direct question about intended nationally determined contributions. They simply asked what the term means.
Just a definition check.
Yeah. The options were a bit confusing, but the answer was straightforward. It is a plan of action outlined by the countries of the world to combat climate change.
Simple enough. But they do get trickier. Let's look at the 2022 prelims. There was a question about the Climate Action Tracker.
Oh, that was a really good elimination question. The options provided suggested it might be a weighing of the United Nations or maybe the IPCC. It sounds very official, right? Climate Action Tracker.
Yeah, it sounds like a UN bureaucracy.
Exactly. But it is actually a database created by a coalition of independent research organizations. It basically acts as a watchdog to see if countries are actually meeting their INDCs. It is not a UN body.
That is a classic UPSC trap right there. Making something sound official and governmental when it's actually an independent or civil society initiative.
You always have to check the parent organization. Just because it sounds like a global government body doesn't mean it is.
Moving on to Section 3. From MDGs to SDGs, Sanjeev Verma 3.3 covers this transition. We moved from the Millennium Development Goals, which ran from 2000 to 2015, to the Sustainable Development Goals, which run from 2015 to 2030. Why the switch? Was it just a UN rebranding exercise?
No, it was actually a fundamental shift in philosophy. The
Yeah.
MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were primarily targeted at developing nations. They were really about rich countries helping the poor countries.
Yeah.
It was very much a donor-recipient model. But the SDGs are universal. They apply to the United States and the UK just as much as they apply to India and Nigeria.
Because sustainability is everyone's problem.
Exactly. Poverty exists in rich countries too. And climate change obviously affects everyone, regardless of GDP.
And there's 17 of these goals. Now, we won't bore you by reading a laundry list, but let's play a quick game of ping pong with the key ones mentioned in the text, just to make them stick in your memory. I'll give you the number, you give me the goal, and why it matters.
Let's do it.
Goal 1 and Goal 2, the absolute basics.
Goal 1 is no poverty. Goal 2 is zero hunger. These are the bedrock. You cannot have sustainable development if people are starving. And notice they are numbered 1 and 2. They are the ultimate priorities.
Goal 5.
Gender equality. Empowering women and girls. And this isn't just a social goal, it's a hard economic one. Educated, empowered women drive economic growth, and they usually manage resources much more sustainably.
Goal 7.
Affordable and clean energy. This is the bridge goal. It connects the economy, because you need energy for industry,
Yeah.
with the environment, because it must be clean, and social welfare, because it has to be affordable.
Goal 13.
Climate action. Taking urgent action to combat climate change. This acts as an umbrella for many of the other goals.
And Vivek Singh makes a really important point about the structure of these goals here. He talks about the concept of leave no one behind and the integrated nature of the goals.
Yes, he emphasizes that you can't just pick one goal and ignore the rest. It's a web.
How so?
For example, if you provide affordable and clean energy, which is Goal 7, that directly impacts good health, which is Goal 3, because people aren't breathing in toxic smoke from wood fires in their kitchens anymore.
Right.
And it impacts quality education, Goal 4, because kids can actually study at night with electric lights. If you fail at one goal, you are likely failing at the others.
Now, how is India actually implementing this? Because we don't have a ministry of SDGs, do we?
No, we don't. But we have NITI Aayog. NITI Aayog is the nodal agency for SDGs in India. They have developed the SDG India Index and Dashboard.
And this ties directly into our federal structure, doesn't it?
It does perfectly. It promotes what we call competitive federalism. By ranking states, say, putting Kerala against Bihar or Himachal against Punjab on their specific SDG scores, it creates a sense of real competition.
States want to look good.
Exactly. States want to improve their ranking to attract investment and just for political prestige, so they work harder on health, education, and water. It basically gamifies development.
I love that concept. Gamifying bureaucracy. We beat you in infant mortality rates. It's a bit morbid, but highly effective. Let's move to Section 4, Green GDP. This is covered in Sanjeev Verma 3.4.
This is one of my absolute favorite economic concepts because it completely exposes the massive flaw in how we traditionally measure success.
So define it for us. What exactly is green GDP?
Green GDP is a national accounting system that factors in the utilization or depletion of non-renewable natural resources.
Okay, let's go back to my factory example from the intro. Standard GDP sees the timber being sold and the factory being built as an absolute win.
Correct. Standard GDP measures the market value of all goods and services produced, but it is value neutral regarding how they are produced.
Right.
If you overfish a lake until it's completely empty, standard GDP spikes because you sold lots of fish this year. If you mine a mountain until it's just a hole in the ground, standard GDP loves it. It does not account for the fact that the lake or the mountain is gone. It treats asset liquidation as income.
Which is terrible accounting. If I sold my house to pay for a vacation, I might feel incredibly rich for a week, but my net worth is dropping. I'm actually poorer.
Exactly. You're burning your capital.
Yeah.
Vivek Singh and Sanjeev Verma both agree completely on this flaw. So green GDP attempts to fix this by subtracting the monetized loss of biodiversity and the costs caused by climate change from that total GDP figure.
So the basic formula is essentially standard GDP minus environmental costs equals green GDP.
Yes. It tries to calculate the net wealth. If you grew your economy by 8%, but you destroyed 3% worth of forests, water tables, and air quality to do it, your green GDP growth is only 5%.
Of course, so why don't we see this number in the headlines then? Why isn't the news saying India's green GDP grew by X%? Why is it always the standard number?
Because it is incredibly hard to calculate. That is the major technical hurdle.
It's hard to put a price on nature.
Exactly. How do you put a dollar value on a specific species of frog going extinct? What is the rupee value of the aesthetic beauty of a clean river? It's highly subjective. And because it's subjective, it's immediately political. No government in the world wants to publish a growth number that is significantly lower than the standard one.
Now, speaking of green terminology, there is a very dark side to this corporate embrace of sustainability, the fake green.
Ah, yes, greenwashing.
This was a direct question in the 2022 prelims.
It was. The question asked for the best description of the term greenwashing, and the answer is conveying a false impression that a company's products are eco-friendly.
So, if an oil company runs a sleek television ad showing a happy bird nesting on an oil rig with soft acoustic music and wind turbines in the background, but they are actually spilling thousands of gallons of crude into the ocean.
That is greenwashing. It is the fake side of the green movement. It is pure marketing, not substance. It's designed to trick the consumer, and sometimes the regulator, into thinking progress is happening when it really isn't.
Now, how do we force companies to actually be green rather than just pretending? Economists love taxes. Let's talk about the carbon tax. Vivek Singh mentions that India doesn't strictly have a carbon tax by name.
True. If you look through the Indian budget documents for a specific carbon tax act, you won't find one. But we do have implicit carbon taxes. We tax carbon without explicitly calling it a carbon tax.
Give me an example.
The best example, which Vivek Singh highlights, involves the transition from the clean energy cess to the GST compensation cess.
Okay, break that down for us because that sounds like bureaucratic alphabet soup.
Let's unpack it. Back in 2010, the government introduced a clean energy cess on coal. Basically, if you buy coal, which is mostly carbon, you have to pay an extra tax. That money goes to go into a specific fund to finance clean energy projects.
Okay, that makes sense.
But when GST came in 2017, that specific cess was abolished. However, it was replaced by the GST compensation cess on coal, which was around 400 rupees per ton.
So the financial effect on the coal buyer is exactly the same.
Economically, yes. It makes coal more expensive to use. It taxes the input. Vivek Singh notes that while it doesn't tax the emissions directly at the tailpipe, which would be a true pure carbon tax, taxing the input acts as a very effective proxy. It strongly discourages coal use.
And there is another very specific term related to this that showed up in the 2020 prelims, the social cost of carbon.
Yes, this is a very technical economic term. The social cost of carbon is a monetary estimate of the long-term damage done by a single ton of CO2 emissions in a given year.
So it's trying to put a price tag on the butterfly effect of pollution. If I emit a ton of carbon today, it contributes slightly to warming, which melts a piece of a glacier in 20 years, which contributes to flooding a coastal city in 30 years.
Exactly. It tries to monetize all those future damages, crop failures, flood damage, healthcare costs due to heat waves, and then it discounts them back to a present value. If the social cost of carbon is calculated to be very high, It provides the economic justification for spending a lot of money today to stop emissions.
It's basically the price tag on the apocalypse.
A bit dramatic, but conceptually, yes. It is the comprehensive price tag on future climate damages.
Let's move to the money side of things. Section 5, climate financing. Sanjeev Verma 3.5, we have all these grand plans, solar panels, electric cars, massive reforestation, but who pays for it? None of this is cheap.
That is the trillion-dollar question, literally. Climate financing refers to local, national, or international financing for two distinct things: mitigation and adaptation.
Let's define those quickly for clarity.
Mitigation is stopping the damage at the source, like building a solar farm instead of a coal plant. You are mitigating the emission before it happens. Adaptation is learning to live with the damage that is already locked in.
Because some warming is unavoidable at this point.
Exactly. So adaptation is building higher seawalls because the ocean is definitely rising,
Mm-hmm.
or developing new drought-resistant seeds for farmers.
And the massive global fight right now is about who writes the check for this.
It is the global bargain. You have the developed countries, the US, Europe, Japan, who industrialized very early. They burned coal for 200 years to get rich. They caused the vast historical accumulation of carbon currently in the atmosphere.
Right?
And then you have developing countries like India, Brazil, various African nations. We're suffering the worst consequences now, but we didn't cause the bulk of the historical problem.
So the developing countries are essentially saying, you broke it, you pay to fix it.
Exactly. And the developed countries actually made a promise. In 2009, at the Copenhagen Summit, they pledged to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 to help developing countries. This money is often channeled through mechanisms like the Green Climate Fund.
Did they actually hit that target? Because 2020 has come and gone.
Spoiler alert, no. They have consistently fallen short of that $100 billion. Or, even worse, they use incredibly creative accounting. They take existing foreign aid money that was already meant for schools or medicine in poor countries and just relabel it as climate finance. Or they offer loans instead of direct grants, so the developing country just ends up in more debt while trying to build solar panels. This is a major, major point of friction in every single COC meeting.
This leads us to a highly critical phrase that Sanjeev Verma uses: common but differentiated responsibilities, or CBDR.
This phrase is the absolute legal bedrock of climate justice. Common means we all have a shared responsibility to save the planet. We're all on the same ship. But differentiated means rich countries have a much bigger responsibility because they have the financial capacity and the historical guilt.
It's kind of like a potluck dinner where everyone has to bring food, but the millionaire is expected to bring the main course, and the struggling student is allowed to just bring napkins.
That is actually a surprisingly accurate analogy. Everyone has to participate, but the burden is proportional to capacity and history.
Let's look at the PYQs for climate finance before we move on.
The Green Climate Fund has appeared in prelims multiple times. You need to know it was set up within the framework of the UNFCCC, that's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to assist developing countries in adaptation and mitigation practices.
Any others?
Yes, the Global Environment Facility, or GEF. It usually serves as the financial mechanism for several different conventions, not just climate. It also funds the Convention on Biological Diversity, for instance.
Okay, we have covered the core theory pretty extensively. Now let's get into Section 6. A deep dive into specific initiatives and PYQs.
The alphabet soup section.
Exactly. We're going to do a rapid fire on specific schemes mentioned in the sources or related PYQs. I'll throw a term at you. You tell me why it matters for the exam.
I'm ready.
Startup India versus Stand Up India. This was a 2016 PYQ, and people confuse these constantly.
Confusing names, completely different goals. Startup India is for general innovation and entrepreneurship. Tech startups, incubators, broad business growth.
And Stand Up India.
Stand Up India is specifically for social inclusion. It focuses strictly on SC, ST, and women entrepreneurs. Its mandate is to ensure bank loans between 10 lakh and 1 crore are given to at least one SC or ST borrower and at least one woman borrower per bank branch. It's entirely about democratizing access to capital for marginalized groups.
Excellent. Next one, organic farming. Sanjeev Verma actually calls this the second green revolution or the evergreen revolution.
This is a concept heavily pushed by M.S. Swaminathan. The first green revolution in the 60s gave us high yields, but it severely degraded the soil with heavy chemicals and massive water overuse.
Right.
The evergreen revolution is about sustainable yields, using organic inputs, relying on soil health cards, and maintaining ecological balance. It's about farming forever, not just for a profitable decade. It's a shift from just focusing on volume to focusing on value and sustainability.
Next, System of Rice Intensification, or SRI, and related to that, the Sustainable Sugarcane Initiative. This was a 2014 PYQ.
The key word here is inputs. These are specific farming methods that use significantly less water and fewer seeds.
How does that work for sugarcane?
For example, the Sustainable Sugarcane Initiative uses targeted drip irrigation and promotes intercropping. It reduces seed costs significantly. The 2014 question specifically asked about the benefits of these systems. Lower seed cost, drip irrigation, no inorganic fertilizers if you're doing the organic versions, and scope for intercropping. If you see SRI or SSI on the exam, immediately think less water, more yield.
Got it. Last one, Climate Smart Agriculture. We saw this in the 2018 and 2021 PYQs.
This is a very tricky one because of global alliances. There was something called GGAS-CH3, the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture.
Right.
The 2018 prelims asked if India was instrumental in its creation. The answer was a hard no. We were a member, but we didn't found it. It was a trap.
So what is our local connection to it?
Locally, India has something called Climate Smart Villages. This connects to the CGIAR research program. The focus is on resilient crops, developing seeds that can survive sudden drought or flash floods. It's really about adapting our agriculture to the new, unpredictable climate reality.
Okay, we are moving towards the end here, but before we wrap up, I want to ask you about mains answer writing strategy.
Crucial part of the prep.
Based on both Sanjeev Verma and Vivek Singh, if a student gets a broad question on inclusive growth, how should they frame their answer to stand out?
This is the golden rule for mains. You must link inclusive growth to sustainability.
You can't separate them.
You really can't. You cannot be truly inclusive if you are actively destroying the very environment that the poor rely on for survival. The poor are always the most vulnerable to climate change.
Because they don't have a buffer.
Exactly. If the monsoon fails, the rich just buy more expensive imported food. The poor starve. If a massive heat wave hits, the rich turn on the air conditioning. The poor die of heat stroke because they work outdoors. So, your mains answers should argue strongly that environmental protection is a fundamental form of poverty protection.
But you shouldn't be too idealistic, right? You have to acknowledge reality.
Correct. You use the Sanjeev Verma argument we started with. Do not be an environmental absolutist in your answers. Acknowledge that India absolutely needs economic growth. Argue that we must prioritize absolute poverty removal.
But do it smartly.
Yes. Argue for doing it through Green GDP methods. Emphasize creating renewable energy jobs. Funding sustainable agriculture. Building massive sanitation infrastructure.
So the thesis is essentially grow, but grow smart.
Exactly. And use the hard data to back it up. Quote the INDC targets we discussed. Quote the 33 to 35% emission intensity reduction. It shows the examiner you aren't just philosophizing about nature. You actually know the policy roadmap.
Fantastic advice. Let's head to the outro. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways for everyone taking notes.
Sure. Number one, sustainable development is fundamentally about intergenerational equity, future versus present. But for India, it absolutely must address the intergenerational issue of poverty, rich versus poor today.
Number two, India's INDCs are very specific. You need to memorize the 3 to 35% emission intensity reduction, the 40% non-fossil power target, and the massive 2.5 to 3 billion ton carbon sink.
Number three, Green GDP attempts to adjust for environmental loss, which exposes the deep flaw in standard GDP accounting. And always watch out for greenwashing by corporations.
And finally, number four, climate finance is the main diplomatic battleground. That $100 billion promise from developed nations is the primary lever India pushes in global negotiations, relying heavily on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities.
Perfect summary.
And here is a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. We spent some time talking about green GDP. Both Sanjeev Verma and Vivek Singh explain the concept in detail, but I want you to imagine if we actually implemented it tomorrow.
Oh boy.
Imagine if the finance minister stood up in parliament and presented the green budget instead of the standard one. Would India's growth story look like a boom, or would it look like a recession?
It would be a shock to the system.
If we mathematically subtracted the cost of every polluted river, every chopped down forest, and every lung affected by severe smog from our 7 or 8% headline growth rate, are we actually growing? And more importantly, is the Indian voter, is your family, ready to accept that much lower number?
That is the truly uncomfortable question. It's very easy to support green GDP in an economics classroom. It's much harder when a politician has to stand up and tell you that you aren't actually as rich as you think you are.
Something to think about as you review your notes. If this deep dive helped you connect the dots for your UPSC prep, please smash that like button. It tells us this format is working for you.
And remember, for the highly detailed notes that cover the Model Main's answers for the exact questions we discussed, including how to structure that nuanced answer on inclusive growth, join our private Telegram library.
Just DM the public channel to join that. And if you are capable, please support us on Patreon. We appreciate every single one of you who helps keep this going. See you in the next deep dive.
Keep learning.